So, welcome everybody, whether it is the morning or it is the afternoon, to Experimenting and Scaling OpenAI. This conversation is going to be about how you take OpenAI and you determine what use cases you're going to use, how you go through your initial pilots and experiments, how you pull that into building real solutions, and how you end up scaling and operationalizing that within your environment. So this has been just a really wonderful journey for us as a concurrency team. We've been working with data science for about 7 years, and this acceleration of AI that happened around OpenAI just recently in the last, say, 5, 6 months has been a tremendous opportunity to see some customers put things into production, see true outcomes from what this can really mean for a business, and really excited to share not only the techniques we've been using to be able to make that successful, but also how it's operationalized and turned into something that you can measure and manage. So a lot of things we're going to talk about today. So getting started, OpenAI implementation patterns, ways we've been implementing it from a tech standpoint, the ML ops, or like, is it a chicken or is it the egg? Some common use cases, and measuring the project. What I would love for you to do is, as you have questions, please put those in the chat. Just hit us as we go. We have 4 concurrency people, actually 5 on this call, that can answer the questions as we go. So that's been a really fun part of these conversations and webinars, has been having a lot of those conversations on the side as we have the presentation. So by all means, start digging in and asking those questions as we go. And we would love for you to connect with us. So one of the reasons we do this is to be able to help build this capability and competency within the community. So as we introduce ourselves, be sure to hit us up on LinkedIn, connect, follow, communicate. We would love to be part of your community. So introduce myself. I'm Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. I'm a 13-time Microsoft MVP. I've been in consulting for 21 years. A lot of work in the Azure space, and most recently, a ton of work in AI. A lot of things that we've learned. That's something I've certainly experienced over time, has been learning things in my personal life and professional life. And I think one of the things I'm most excited about in this is being able to share some of the experiences that we've had, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and for you to be able to get some perspective on that. For the furthest webinar participant in concurrency history, we have, oh, what happened? I missed him on the slide. We have Brian Hayden. Now, Brian Hayden, let me get that slide up, so that way I can see Brian Hayden. You're hidden here, sir. Behind the slide.
Maybe I'm not even there. There I am.
There you are. All right. So we have Brian Hayden. Hey, where are you, Brian?
I'm in Latvia right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's 6:30, 7 o'clock tonight. Any rate, so a little bit about me. I've been in the application development space since about the mid-90s. Spent most of my career in consulting. Actually, I've been at Concurrency for about 6 years, and I'm a solution architect. A little bit about me. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I spend a lot of time hunting and fishing. I spend through a lot of my fishing stuff. I donate a lot of time to a lot of community efforts. So like Fishing Has No Boundaries, or a lot of the food pantries we donate our fish to. And I'm the proud father of 2 amazing children. And then probably fun fact about me, besides being in Latvia right now, is that I'm an identical twin.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And then we have Alessandra. Alessandra has been like right at the tip of a lot of these projects you've been doing. So just introduce yourself for a second there, Alessandra.
Sure thing. Nice to have you all here. I have a background in the sciences, have been applying everything I've learned through the years in the this business space now. Very interested in the LLMs, have been interested in the space ever since the Hugging Face models, the early pioneers started research in this space. Now OpenAI allows us to really accelerate NLP development and application. So it's really exciting time to be working in NLP, because we just can take something from very early concept to something into production much faster than we were used to be able to a couple of years ago.
Awesome. And then we have Mac. Mac has been doing a lot of the software development surrounding some of the solutions that we've been building in this space.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Thanks for your time. Like Nathan mentioned, I do a lot of the integration portion of this. I work hand in hand with the rest of the team here to deliver an end product. And I guess one of the fun facts about me, and maybe it's fun or maybe it's not, before I stepped into the software development space, I was aspiring for a career in law enforcement. And so I made a pretty sudden left turn and ended up here. And I love every minute of it.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to dive right in. This team is got all to a certain degree as many answers as we have. So we're going to dive right into how you get started. So these are the typical patterns that we see companies using to be able to get themselves going. And it maybe even backing up just from a second. Part of applying generative AI in your organization is understanding the mission of your business and knowing how the mission of your business will be accelerated by leveraging this technology and thinking about the avenues that you interact with your customers to be able to do so. So this isn't just about like coming up with an idea. It's coming up with an idea that solves for where you're intending to move your business in the direction of. And sometimes when you think about people, process, technology, which one drives which, right? Does the process drive the people? Does the people drive the process? Does the technology drive both? This is an interesting point in time where the technology is disrupting the business climate, but it still needs to be consistent with the mission of your business. So if you're, for example, in the hoteling business, you should probably have a really great asynchronous chatbot that people can interact with to change or adjust their reservations. Some companies have them, some don't. It's a major competitive difference between companies right now. That goes directly to serving your customers. Thinking about how I take what I want to do really well and bring that to my customers in a way that accelerates how I serve them. And when we see the typical pattern that we're looking at, it starts with ideation and driving these envisioning sessions where you broaden the tent, you show what's possible, you get everyone to the same playing field, and you start to arrive at opportunities to be able to create value. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Once you've arrived at scenarios to create value, you have to really think about which are the scenarios which drive the most value and are aligned to your ability to execute. Sometimes there's ideas that are like moonshot ideas, right? If only we could do this, but it's probably not the idea that you go after first, because there's a part of the plan that's around achieving quick wins, achieving initial value, hitting the low-hanging fruit, things that you can start to get your legs under you with the technology that may not be the biggest bang, but it might be a really wonderful value that your company can deliver internally or externally. Moving into the idea of doing that pilot and getting value and measuring it based upon a successful pattern. So when you going back to the idea of an envisioning session, and then we're going to kind of show you an example, and I'd love to just kind of riff off of that a little bit and talk about what our experience have been. Starting with an envisioning session has been a really powerful vehicle for companies to start to broaden the tent and understand what's possible and come up with a list of ideas. These have been from 5 to 100 people. They've been on site or they've been virtual. We've done them globally or we've done them in person. We don't have to actually do them for you. You can do them yourself, but it's certainly an opportunity, is a way for you to create that curiosity across the business. And one of the things I think is really powerful about it is it starts to think about your mission in the context of the technology and how people across the business have these ideas that have been stored up, that once it gets unlocked, they have the ability to be able to bring that to the surface so they can be one of the ideas that might be really the winner. Your goal is to bring back the why and the what, and to think about how you vote and rank those ideas. So an example of when we did this recently was with Generac Power Systems. We did this on site with their team. And one of the outcomes of this was 10 teams that worked together. They were about teams of 5, 6 people about. And they all came back to a group. They all had their top 3 ideas of what was probably 10 to 15 per team. And after that, we had this commitment of a list of all these ideas that we then had the ability to sort and choose from. What made this successful is they had a very inspirational leader, a couple inspirational leaders. They made a commitment at the beginning of the session, they were going to pick one. So they were communicating that this was a meaningful envisioning exercise. And it got people thinking about the capabilities in the context of that art of the possible that it started with. So I'll just pause here for a second. Brian, Alessandra, Mac, you guys were part of some of these types of conversations. What was your perspective that made them successful, and maybe what were some of the things that people should avoid as they go into these envisioning sessions?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. So the more the merrier, honestly, and less IT and more business people. So really the solutions that come out of this are typically geared towards helping people that don't have a technical background. Because me as a developer, when I ran into like these challenges of, some really repetitive tasks, I just take it upon myself to automate it. I wouldn't wait for things. But less technical people don't really have those tools at their disposal. So their frustrations are probably going to be more realistic and more pragmatic for us to solve with some of these solutions. So I definitely would include business stakeholders, people that actually feel the pain more than IT people that are thinking about, oh, how can I actually build this? You get more fruitful conversations out of it.
And to piggyback off of that, I also say that no idea or no task is too small. And so like if you keep saying, if 100 of your employees are repeating the same 5-minute task and they're repeating it 20, 30 times a day, then those 5 minutes snowballs, right? So even the smallest of tasks can prove to be beneficial for your business.
I'll add up to a little bit about what Brian said. My experience building these solutions is that the solution is just as good as the business value that it brings to your organization. And having people with a clear view of the day-to-day pain points is really where the value of these events reside. And we see some really amazing concepts that are actionable today that have come from people who deal with these pain points day in, day out.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So once you've had that envisioning session and you've done it internally and you've brought in the tent, you've gotten ideas, you have to make a choice around which one is going to be right to pursue. And there's 3 elements, and Alessandra really hit on this, that make this success, make an opportunity successful. And this is where we've either had success or failure in some of these projects. I think the first and most important one is that you have availability of data, or you know where you're going to get it, and you have the ability to go get it. Preferably, you already know where it is, especially for the initial low-hanging fruit use case. Because one of the things we see people doing is they'll come up with a really good idea, but they haven't really gotten the information or data to be able to create or execute on that idea yet. So it slows down the whole process because they spend all their time just trying to find it or organize it. But in many cases, there's data that's already ready to be harvested for valuable use cases. So availability of data is sort of one of the key things. Second thing is, does it have worth to do? How many times do I do this process? So for example, we were talking to a company, I think it's on the next slide, where they run a process 500,000 times a year. Like, okay. And it's readily easy for us to actually automate that process with Azure Form Recognizer and OpenAI. Great use case. They do it a lot. It's got value. It's time intensive and valuable to the customers. And then even if you have those 2 things, availability data and return on investment, you need a sponsor. And that's why I mentioned very early on that when you do those envisioning sessions, it's important to have someone who's sort of sticking up for the group that says, not only are we going to envision things, but we're going to do one of them. And I'm going to back that as an executive within this organization, that this is something that's worth our time to pursue. And in a certain sense, that takes an inspirational, bold leader, but it's one that's going to get the payoff of sponsoring something that's going to provide not only value in and of itself, but also starts the machine of creating value with AI in an organization. So this is kind of an example of taking ideas and starting to group them into categories. So this was, an example of like taking ideas like review automation or quoting or scheduling and staging. This is obviously manufacturing. Incident tracking, sort of failure analysis that happens within the manufacturing environment, grouping those into different types of opportunities based upon category, and then identifying which of these are the ones that I would consider starting with in the context of those categories. So category priority, the difficulty, whether it's an operational savings or it's a revenue driver, and then an understanding of the value description, 400,000 times per year, 90,000 times per year, win rate on quotes, like this example of driving increased win rate on quotes, the idea of a easy button for tracking incidents within the manufacturing environment, getting this organized into a spreadsheet or a value analysis that then gets compared and contrasted amongst a smaller group after that envisioning session is that critical step to picking one or picking two or picking three and saying, these are the ones we're going to run with initially and try to achieve value on. And doing so in a very objective way, tied to even the value isn't as high, but it might be an easier achievable solution that leads to an even higher value later on. Any perspective, Brian? I know you and I just recently did this with a couple companies. What was your experience walking through doing value analysis, and any tips to picking the right one?
Put me on the spot here.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of a challenge. I mean, the calculating the ROI, takes a little bit of effort, both on our side to assess, how much, to really assign the difficulty score for it. There's a little bit of a pause, in getting to that point. But once we can kind of articulate, like, all right, getting to phase one is going to cost you this, getting to phase actually working is going to cost this, is helpful for people to decide, when they're going to get there. The challenge for us, I think, sometimes is it's really easy to demonstrate like capabilities, but operationalizing it is something that's that takes quite a bit longer. And I definitely want to kind of communicate that up front, that just because I can log into ChatGPT and make something spit out an answer doesn't mean that it's going to be accurate every single time. But it's been really useful. The spreadsheet that you put together, Nathan, that we use, pretty regularly, has been really effective at communicating the value proposition and helping to at least, put them on the quadrant of, value to effort. So.
You just hit a really important point, Brian, that idea of like, it's pretty easy to get to the 50% threshold of demoable, but getting from the 50% to the 80% is not as easy as sometimes people think. And it's where the hard work resides.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a really, really good example. Alexandre and I were joking about this actually this morning. So one of our customers is, they get these emails coming in that has some dates in them. And, I was trying to engineer the prompt to just imply the year if they didn't. So like somebody might just say July 11th, right? And obviously they probably mean July 11th, coming up in a couple of weeks. And so I would told the prompt just to add the current year. Well, it doesn't necessarily know what the current year is. It can imply that based on some information it might have in its model, but it doesn't actually know. And I got 2020 in one prompt, I got 2021 in another prompt, and then I got yelled at saying I'm an AI model, I have no sense of time. So yeah, I could make a nice demo and it looked really good, but it's some of those nuances that are pretty fun to get around.
Awesome. One of the things that you start to do as you identify the opportunities, so like if you had said this was one and this was one and this was one, this is one, is they start to move into work streams that then iterate into first pilot, second pilot, production, validation, operationalization, and downstream. And that's really where you're moving up this, you're managing expectations because of understanding that demo doesn't mean production, right? So moving from demo to pilot to the next stage of pilot to production. And also that you're essentially establishing work streams that are going to be measured on whether they result in that value. And you're going to manage expectations and adoption associated with those work streams. I know that Alessandre was involved in a very large scale project that was used across about 600 people as a sort of side-loaded solution. But it took probably 3-4 months for the actual rollout to be done, because you have throughout that process you're changing the way people work and they're getting increased capability as a result, but just the adoption part of that took some time. I don't know if Alessandra, you want to just even talk about that a little bit. Like what does it mean to like even roll out adoption aspects of this?
That's a great question. So what our finding is that driving the technology, driving an application is just as important as change management and training, and really one sort of go over what the tool is supposed to do and how the tool is supposed to interact with your day-to-day life. But then that is a two-way street as well. So interacting with the users, interacting with the people who will use the application every day and sort of understand how it fits their workflows is really, really important. And that is not something that gets done, I think, ever. So we've noticed that for months, we have some metrics on how to track user interaction with what we've built. And we've noticed that old habits creep back in over time. So this is a continuous thing that needs to happen, but the value is definitely there. I've heard of people saying, please don't take this tool away from me. This changed exactly how I work every day. So it's been great to see.
Awesome. So as you're getting ready to move into a specific use case, typically we'll go through an exercise like this, where you are validating your goal, identifying the input data set, the things that you need to have in order to be successful. In this case, it's a contract review, where you match the PO and the customer order information to make sure that they're getting the right thing. So your expected output is this sort of matching of those elements between the PO and the order acknowledgement to say, am I shipping them what they asked for? And then keep doing validation in the context of some of the finer points of that. And the consumption would be done essentially by taking them, in this case, this is a process that runs hundreds of thousands of times a year, upwards toward 500,000. And those users now would only have to evaluate the ones that are in the exception folder as opposed to all of them. But in order to do so, we need to be able to provide them with that output that lets them understand where to go. So even in this project, you're initially starting with a set of customers that are a little bit more nuanced. You're focusing it, and then you're scaling it out after that. Oftentimes, like finding that the initial way you built it is very well aligned to those scenarios, but you also find those gotchas as part of the scale program, and then moving to 99% as it moves. So as you move into a use case, you do a pilot understanding that there's future phases that need to happen, but that's lined up with a value that's going to be accomplished within the organization. So ultimately, the pilot is based on a constrained timeline, realistic first goals that you can prove and are objective, and show the business, man, this actually works and people are getting value from it, which then lets you iterate on that in production. And just like Alessandre was saying, like you have to measure that on an ongoing basis. And that's one of the things I think has been most, I don't know, surprising is the wrong word, but like many companies, they haven't measured these processes that are being automated before on a human scale. So not only are you getting the value of automating the process, but you're also getting the value of measuring the process and understanding the speed that certain things take in a pretty objective way to know the difference between the human process and the non-human process, and maybe even the combined together. And ultimately, this gets to a position where this is the new operational state, and we'll talk about some capabilities that you want to have in place as you get to that position, and when you build them and how you build them. So let's talk a little bit about some technical implementation patterns that we've been seeing, and I'll kind of lean on Alessandria a little bit here. This is actually a slide from Microsoft Build, and it talks a little bit about how we're seeing the implementation patterns start to take shape in the context of a company scenario with ChatGPT type capabilities, but doing it in the context of data that's unique to you and needs to be loaded into the approach.
Yeah, so one of the most exciting and useful workflows that we have to adopt with Azure OpenAI is enabling that AI, the power of that AI onto your own custom data. So the way you see here on the right side, you have all the data sources that are existing within your organization. And there is the main workflow here is to leverage that information there to enable it's something like a Q&A bot to be able to answer questions on things like your products, your documents, or your processes. Now, the first question we get with this sort of workflow is, well, how private is my data? How secure is it? And that is the main difference in between going directly to OpenAI for services versus utilizing the Azure OpenAI service through Azure. So through Azure, your models, everything that you use, stay within your Azure environment, meaning that your data does not get sent to anywhere outside of your Azure environment. So you enjoy all of the privacy settings and the enterprise agreements that cover any other Azure resource that you use today. And this is just a way of saying that any data that you already have in your Azure space, you can use Azure OpenAI and have no additional concerns over isolation or protection or privacy. And in the next slide, we have a very interesting and exciting development. So this workflow does require some under the hood work to happen today. So it's not something that is enabled through Azure OpenAI natively. This will soon change. So native support for being able to ingest your files onto the service is being rolled out here. And then the technical details of this is on the next slide. And this is just to sort of, this is just the user case. This is just the UI, how it's going to work. And you can see it's very user-friendly. But what's happening in the background here is that you're really taking your customer information and you're putting it inside this isolated environment where it does all of the automated integration of your information with the LLMs, with one caveat, of course. So this was going to be very easy to implement right off the bat. But if there's any things that need to be improved and tweaked, that's where the difficulty comes in. So that's where some custom work will be required to be done.
I think there's another scenario that's also come up, which is this idea of using retrieving information, which is from a database or from a platform. Like, what should people look out for there? Like, what works, what might not quite work yet as a production scenario? Like, there's some nuance to this.
For sure. So a little background, GPT models, they do really great with text data. But the GPT models do really poorly when you ask it to do mathematical operations. And you can try this out in ChatGPT. Give it a list of like 12 numbers and ask it what's the average of these numbers. And if very rarely it gets it correctly. However, it's really good with text, including code. So in principle, you could ask a question, have it write a SQL query for you, and then you can execute the SQL query against your database. So you're using GPT to do the text understanding and code writing, and you're using SQL to do the math. So SQL is really great at math, not really good at text. GPT, poor at math, but really good at text. So you can combine those two and have some sort of automated system where you can ask a question and then have factual mathematical information coming back to you. There is a caveat, however, is that when you call a database, you really need to know what the schema of all your tables and how they relate to each other is. And from Microsoft, we are getting the feedback that if your schemas are pretty simple, this can work pretty well for you. As the schemas become, as your database becomes more tables get added and more relational interactions can happen, the efficiency of this workflow goes down. And so it really is an interesting workflow, and it really is dependent on what you need. And one interesting aspect that we've been talking about that is in between these two extremes of having something really simple to query against versus something very difficult is somewhere in between, where you can create a view that is sort of designed explicitly so that GPT can understand. So that is one way to enable a system to understand a question, get your mathematical answer back, and be pretty confident that it is accurate. As long as these caveats are kept in mind throughout the development cycle.
Awesome. That was great delineation. Thanks, Alessandre. All right, so we're going to show you just a couple common use cases. If you've been on a previous one of these, you might see a couple that you've seen before, but also maybe a couple new ones. So let's kind of go through a couple examples of what people are doing and how they're using it. So this is an example of a sort of product FAQ engine. This is a POC project that we did. So you're asking questions about a boat. That boat is providing you conversational answers back and citations. Really great low-hanging fruit scenario, both internal use cases, external use cases, customer service use cases. This is just, it's a fantastic spot to be able to leverage this as an initial story that has significant value to the people that are interacting with it. So asking questions about this kind of boat, having the citation and the answer associated with that boat, the maximum speed associated with it. You can see where it found that maximum speed within the documents, actually surfacing the citation right within the interface. One of the things that you can see is that it understood wide open throttle in the context of speed. One thing you can see, it doesn't necessarily understand if it understands what draft is, but what it didn't understand until we started to help it understand it is that draft equals depth. So if I said, what's the shallowest water that I could take my boat in? That's where your 50% demo needs to go to the 80%, 90% needed to bring it into production to give your customers or your internal teams a experience that's satisfying to them and feels satisfying. So that's an example where that language might need to be tweaked a little bit, but it's a really great way to be able to help customers or internal users to be able to achieve value faster versus picking up the phone and calling someone. So that's an initial use case. So another example is like healthcare chat, being able to ask a question about your deductibles. This is actually a chat that would be for a end customer. Like what are my in-network, out-of-network costs? You can see that we've actually adopted that internal to concurrency in a Teams bot, asking questions about the health plan and dental coverage. and being able to answer those questions. Great for HR use cases. Another like really like take my employee handbook and train a bot on it and be able to answer questions easily. I've got a company that's building one. It has like the really cool moniker for it, and it's the logo of their company and such. This is an example of that SQL query writing assistant. So it's, in this case, it's helping you to write the query, but really what it's demonstrating is that you can pull back information from databases if you fit inside the context of the criteria that Alessandro was talking about. So a couple examples of that. Another example of doing some automation associated with sorting and assigning work. Many of the companies that we're working with, it's about driving automations, things that they do a lot. Some of the ones you saw initially were automate this process that I have to review these two documents out over and over. And traditional AI platforms weren't capable of doing that, but now that we have sort of large language models combined with those, they can. Or in this case, it's about assigning the work to a particular person. How do I optimize the assignment and sorting and routing of that work inside of my organization? So many examples of where this is being worthwhile and usable, and simply makes it easier for an individual to do their job. Less time dinking around in software platforms, more time helping customers. So automation on the operational side is a huge win. It's definitely something to be focused on for some low-hanging fruit. Customer service scenarios, turning this into a sort of chat interface that then provides this information below, doing so in a way that helps to drive experience for your customer, information back to them that they have to do less steps to be able to get to, that it intuitively understands where they are. And finally, one thing I want you to get some understanding of is this idea of building your own copilots. You've heard about GitHub Copilot. You've probably heard about the Office tools now having a copilot where it starts to do things for you. Think like spell checker is a very rudimentary version of this, right? Like as I type, it tells me something's wrong. If that was suddenly gone, what would happen to all of our spelling? It'd be pretty bad, right? So like copilots are about doing what I'm doing faster. So this is an example of a quoting experience that's built sideloaded straight into the experience a person's working with. They get a request to quote, that gets moved into extracted information, and we actually automate the creation of a quote for that customer that they can then be accepted and sent back or modified, with the goal of reducing the time necessary for a person to put that quote together, regardless of industry, and then to be able to send that back to the customer and have a great experience very quickly. So many industries can take advantage of this kind of capability, whether the requests are coming through a configurator tool and it's being used to be able to ease the experience that they have there, or it's being used to receive emails and respond back with packages or of quotes. Sometimes they're sending like manifests and PDFs that need to be consumed and then intaked and then created into structured quotes that get sent back. So much opportunity here. So you can see what we did is we sideloaded it as part of an interface they're already working in. Many of the experiences that we're seeing are ones where people are taking something they already have, an app, an experience, and they're tying this into the experience they have. Sometimes it's with an RPA tool where you do a process and it goes and clicks on some things. Like one of the processes that we're working with a company on right now is an accounting process where they have to go in and essentially harvest deal collection or bill collection activities. Super repeatable. They can do it over and over and over, and we can automate a lot of it with an interface like this. So let's talk about, like, once you get those solutions and they get to a point of production, what does it mean to start to operationalize that? And how do I take that to a position where I have confidence in the picture? So one tool in that is called Prompt Flow, but I want you to maybe just even step back from that. Alessandro, maybe you're probably the best person to talk about this. Just give us an understanding at first about, like, what does operationalization mean in this space? And then how does a tool like Prompt Flow plug into helping us with that?
Yeah, operationalizing machine learning systems is taking it from that So the first thing is this explorative, experimental, and hypothesis testing way of building a system. But then you have the machine learning model, and that's great at doing what you like. It could be a Q&A bot, for example. To take that concept and putting into putting into production, a lot of things have to be considered. So it means taking it from a free flow format, package it in a way that can communicate with your other application components. And lastly, and one of the most important things is defining key performance metrics and key monitoring metrics. So once you operationalize a machine learning system, it's about getting it to connect to an app and have its the machine learning inferences served to an app. But then on the other side, keep very well defined metrics and monitoring for performance and behavior. And what prompt flow does here really well is that a lot of this, when you're in the early experimentation phase, chaining prompts is something very popular, and Azure is making this very, very intuitive to be able to build right onto Azure ML. So Azure ML is the main way to operationalize machine learning through Azure. And this is yet another tool that allows us to take an early concept into a production state much faster than we've been able to in the past.
Awesome, thank you. So another capability that is coming into question is as you start to roll out these AI models into conversational interfaces, how do you mitigate some of the safety issues that might be part of that? And it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. Like, do you solve the safety issues before you, like, is like the Wright flyers, for example, like we didn't have the TSA until pretty far down the line of knowing that planes could fly, right? So they probably didn't have very effective like crash landing or seatbelt gear on that plane. But we also know that that's necessary when we get it to production. So what I think Mike's to create interfaces which answer the right questions and don't answer questions that they really have no business answering. So, for example, I'm looking for an axe to cut a path in the forest. Can you recommend one? Certainly. There are many types of axes available for different purposes, but for cutting a path in the forest, good choice is a felling axe or a hatchet, et cetera, et cetera. And here's some products that you could potentially buy. I'm looking for an axe to cut a person in the forest. Can you recommend one? And then immediately filtering that out, knowing that that's not an appropriate question to be asking a platform, and knowing that I have the ability to be able to make some of that delineation myself based upon the type of company and the tool that I'm running and the kinds of questions that it should be built to answer. So AI safety is something that, as you start to operationalize, is an important part of how you think about these models, and it's not just a sort of theoretical, philosophical question anymore. It's a real day-to-day kind of question that you need to think about in the context of the questions that it will be answering. And that's been an interesting part of building these in a very general way, has been really focusing the use case on the questions that it's allowed to answer. And just through prompts, you can do a lot of that just by saying, you are this kind of bot and you can only answer these kinds of questions. And there's ways to kind of get around that. And that's where some of these tools can come into play to help provide additional filtering. Alessandro, do you want to talk a little bit about like monitoring results? That's just a huge topic as you get to the production stage of this.
Of course. And I can even sort of lean on the example you sort of went through, right? So when someone asked for an axe to cut a person in the forest, if you're doing chain prompting, that means one chain was alerted to either a security concern or the built-in security features from Microsoft have kicked in. Now that produces a data point for you. That data point can then be displayed over time in the monitoring tools that Azure offers today. So imagine you want to find out how many times the model had to step in and say, okay, this is not a safe question you just asked me. And you really want to track that over time because you want to find out how this app is used. This is done through monitoring. So monitoring is great because it doesn't only allow you to keep track of performance metrics, that are very important, but allows you to keep track of operational metrics and safety metrics. And this is like done real time. So there's really no surprise about what these systems are doing in production.
Awesome. Thank you, Alessandro. Okay, and then we have this conversation about call rates. Let's just kind of dive in. What even is this? To help.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So one of the main things to keep in mind when scaling these systems to production and adding more users over time is to keep the call rate in mind. And call rate means if someone is asking one question to OpenAI, that's one call that I have to make. So that's one use. Now, when I ask a question, that question contains words. Those words are broken into tokens. And I put here about 1 word's about 1.5 tokens. So if you have about 1,000 words, for some reason you have a question of 1,000 words, that's going to be broken down to 1,500 tokens. And then you send it to OpenAI. That counts as one call, and that counts as 1,500 tokens. There are limits to how much service you get through Azure OpenAI today. And those are broken into 2 ways. It's broken in calls per minute and tokens per minute. And so here you have, I put a little demonstration here for the various models. So text GPT-4, text DaVinci 3. So text DaVinci 3 is 120,000 tokens per minute. And then the GPT-4s are much lower. They're still in preview. And all others are 240,000 tokens per minute. Now, that sounds like a lot. And it sounds like it will take a lot to get to those limits. But once you start rolling applications to hundreds of people, it's very, we get to these kind of numbers very fast. So I think the number one thing that I would like to recommend to keep in mind when scaling these things is to keep these sort of calculations on your back pocket before you keep adding users. Now, if your usage, if you already know that your usage is going to go above what these limits are, you can contact Microsoft and they will increase your quote dependent on your usage requirements.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I want to go around the horn and talk about any remaining tips that you have on things that people should be thinking about in the broader context of their OpenAI journey. And one that I was thinking about was just around the expectation of retraining or rebuilding or iterating on models. Alessandro, having brought these through to production all the way, like, what is that like expectation that people should have on the is model just built and sits, right? Like there's an iteration, there's a next step, there's a maintenance. Like, what does that look like with some of these things that you're building?
It is very system dependent, but across and workflow dependent. But I think what you're referring to is a very strong thing to keep in mind, which is very rarely the initial solution ends up being the optimal solution. And there is Microsoft does a really great job with these automated tools to make it really easy for teams to get the initial state out the door and really show the promise. I think the longest that it takes is to take that initial approach, that 50% requirements, and bring it to that 80%. And then we have what we call the law of diminishing returns. The same amount of work that it takes from 50 to 80, the same amount of work is going to take from 80 to 90, and the same amount of work is going to go from 90 to 95, and the same amount of work that's going to go from 95 to 98. So keeping in mind what your ultimate goal before you even start is, and then keeping in mind that there's this diminishing returns effects that really allows you to nail down how long it truly takes to get some of these things to production.
Good point. Brian, what's your perspective? Anything that you have that people should really know as they start evaluating getting started in this?
Yeah, so two kind of related things that jump out to me. One is, I mean, this is really new technology in terms of the commercial adoption of it and actually being able to use it. I mean, people like Alexandre have been using these LLMs for quite a while and understand their capabilities. But in terms of like being able to get out to the masses, I mean, this is really, really new, cutting edge stuff. So don't be afraid to experiment with it. We don't know like 3 years from now what the best use cases are going to be because people just haven't ideated enough and thought of new problems to apply this to. So don't be afraid, to experiment with it and challenge yourself to, to come up with a really new and creative application of these technologies. And then the other like kind of related part of this to me is that I'm finding that a lot of our customers are much more comfortable taking an idea that can be applied to their customers and applying it to their internal customers first. That's going to give you the confidence that the solution that you're bringing out isn't going to impact your customers negatively. And so, one thing I'd like to encourage people to do is think of something that's customer facing, but would really help your business too, and use that as your experiment or how you dip your toes into this.
Thanks, Brian. And then Mac, what from an application side, like what have been some of the things that you've been thinking about here?
Yeah, so in the previous engagements that Alexandre and I have been involved with, kind of going off of what he mentioned before is the fact that your users and the end users that end up using this application or whatever we build, they will surprise you in that they may go on a journey that you don't expect them to go on, in terms of how they use it. And so one is to not be discouraged by that, but two is to not allow that to ultimately sway you away from taking it to the next level. We've seen that users surprised us. The users surprised the business in that they weren't sure that the envisioning of how they're going to use it was different than what it ended up happening. So to definitely be aware of that. Now, that's true for all applications that anybody builds, but it's especially true for something that is as open-ended as Azure OpenAI.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so back to where we started. How do you go from here? You go into usually one of these three spots, but what we really recommend is you start with one or two. You understand the opportunities that are in front of you. You run envisioning sessions to be able to create those use cases that are valuable across the business. You get business buy-in, you get it aligned to your mission. You figure out what the low-hanging fruit is, things that can benefit internally and then pivot externally, and then move into the creation of these opportunities that are evaluated, validated, it's going to drive capabilities for the business. You put some energy into it, you drive it into pilot, you prove that it will work, and then you bring that through to an operationalized state that is measured, is showing value, and then sets the groundwork scale-wise to be able to do this many, many, many more times within your organization, to start pivoting your organization to take the processes that you do and make them AI-enabled processes. So as you close down from the event today, make sure that you pick one of these that you'd love to have a follow-up on. We would love to talk with your organization on a group envisioning session or evaluating a scenario or driving into a unique pilot and have that conversation, help you get going. So that's going to be in the forum when you close down. Please pick one. And we were really fortunate to have the opportunity to talk to you today. We're really thankful to be able to be involved in the community in this way, and looking forward to having some one-on-one conversations with each of you. So have a fantastic rest of your day, And thanks for spending some time with us to talk about AI.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.